All it takes is one little smell, and I am not in this kitchen anymore. I am 8 years old, standing in my mama's kitchen in Alabama, in my bare feet on that cold linoleum floor, watching her stir a pot of something that smelled so good it made your knees weak. We didn't have much, but that woman could take a ham hock, a handful of dried beans, and a little love, and she would feed all 8 of us until we couldn't move. Every bite tasted like $100. Today, I want to take you back to that kitchen, back to the 1960s, when black mothers were feeding families on almost nothing and making it taste like everything. Now, before we get to the end of this video, I am going to share my mother's Sunday neck bones and butter beans with you. That might not sound like much to some folks, but if you were raised the way I was raised, just the name of that dish is enough to make your eyes water. So you stay with me. You hear? That one is worth the wait. Recipe 1. Pinto bean soup. The first meal on our list is pinto bean soup. And honey, this was a staple in practically every black household I knew. A big bag of dried pinto beans cost almost nothing and would feed a family of 8 for 2 or 3 days if you were careful. Mama would soak her beans overnight, then cook them the next day with water, a smoked ham hock, onion, garlic, and black pepper. That pot sat on the back burner all day, bubbling low and slow, filling the whole house with a warm, smoky smell. By supper time, those beans had turned into a thick, creamy soup she'd ladle over cornbread right in the bowl. It filled you up in a way that felt honest and real. Recipe 2. Fried salt pork and gravy. Right alongside those beans, you'd find fried salt pork and gravy. Salt pork was one of the cheapest cuts you could buy, with so much flavor that a little went a long way. Mama would slice it thin, fry it in her cast iron skillet until golden and crispy, then make her gravy in the same pan. She'd pour off a little grease, stir in flour, let it toast dark, then pour in water or milk slowly, scraping up every brown bit. That gravy would thicken into something silky and deeply savory, poured over the salt pork and served with biscuits. It cost almost nothing and tasted like $1,000,000. Recipe 3. Cornbread in cast iron. You cannot talk about 1960s soul food without talking about real cornbread. Not the sweet kind from a box. The kind made in a cast iron skillet with corn, meal, buttermilk, an egg, and bacon grease, coming out with a crust on the bottom, nearly as crispy as a cracker. Mama would grease that skillet with bacon fat and heat it in the oven before she poured in the batter. When the batter hit that hot grease, it sizzled, and that's what gave the bottom its beautiful crust. Inside, it was tender with a toasty, nutty smell I still associate with safety and home. We ate that cornbread with nearly every meal, and Mama made it so often she never needed a recipe. Recipe 4. Collard greens with ham hocks. Collard greens were not optional in our house. Mama would wash every leaf by hand, slice out the tough stem, and chop them into thick ribbons. Into the pot they went with a ham hock, onion, garlic, apple cider vinegar, red pepper flakes, and salt, cooking low and slow for hours until they turned from bright green to a deep, dark olive. The liquid left behind, that pot liquor, was like liquid gold. The smell of collard greens cooking lives in your memory forever. And when you finally sat down with them, tender and glossy, that ham hock falling off the bone and hot sauce on top, there was nothing better in the world. Recipe 5. Crackling bread. Cracklings are pieces of pork skin and fat fried until crispy and golden, and in the 1960s, nothing was wasted. Mama would fold those cracklings right into her cornbread batter, and what you got was a dense, savory bread so rich and flavorful it barely needed anything on top. Every bite had little pockets of crispy pork mixed in, and the fat from those cracklings made the whole loaf more moist and tender. This was fuel. It kept children running and growing and field workers going all morning. And it tasted absolutely spectacular. Recipe 6. Dried pea porridge. Dried peas cost almost nothing and could feed a crowd. Mama would cook split peas or dried field peas low and slow until they completely fell apart into a thick, smooth porridge, seasoned with salt, pepper, onion, and a little smoked meat when she had it. That porridge was warming in a way that went all the way to your bones. On cold mornings or rainy evenings, a bowl of pea porridge with cornbread on the side was just about perfect. Children ate it without complaint, and grown folks ate it because it stuck with you. This is one of those dishes that has mostly disappeared from modern tables, and that is a shame. Recipe 7. Smothered chicken. Smothered chicken made you feel rich even when you weren't. Mama would season chicken pieces with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder, dredge them in flour, and brown them in a hot skillet. Then she'd make her gravy right in the same pan, onions and flour cooked in the drippings, then broth and milk stirred in slowly until smooth and the color of warm caramel. The chicken went back in, the lid went on, and everything simmered until the meat was falling tender and the gravy had soaked into every piece. Served over white rice, this was what you made when company was coming or when somebody needed comfort. Recipe 8. Neck bones and rice. Neck bones were one of the cheapest cuts from the butcher, but cooked low and slow, they made a rich, deeply savory broth. Mama would brown her neck bones first, cover them with water, add onion, garlic, bell pepper, salt, and pepper, and let them go for hours. The meat isn't much. You have to work for it, picking it off the bone in little tender pieces, but that's part of the joy. You sit down with your plate of rice covered in that dark, silky gravy, and you take your time. You pick the meat clean, you sop up every drop. It is not a meal you eat in a hurry. And that's a beautiful thing. Recipe 9. Chicken feet. Stew. I know some of you just made a face. That's all right. Don't you worry. Just stay with me a minute. Chicken feet are full of gelatin and cooked long enough they make the richest broth you have ever tasted. Mama would clean them and simmer them with onion, garlic, tomatoes, and seasonings until the stew turned thick and glossy. The little bits of tender meat you could pick off were sweet and mild. Served over rice with cornbread, this was a complete meal born from the philosophy of using everything. And somewhere in that necessity, something truly delicious was born. Recipe 10. Fried catfish. Fried catfish was a Friday night tradition in so many black families, including mine. Mama would season the fish with salt, pepper, garlic, and hot sauce, then roll each piece in seasoned yellow cornmeal. Into a skillet of hot oil they'd go, sizzling and crackling, filling the whole house with that golden, crispy smell. She'd fry them until they were deep golden brown with a crust that snapped when you bit in, and inside the fish was white and flaky and sweet. We ate fried catfish with coleslaw, hot sauce, white bread, and dill pickles. Not fancy. But gathered around that table on a Friday night, it felt like a celebration every time. Recipe 11. Hog head cheese. Hog head cheese is not a cheese at all. It's a terrine made from the meat of a pig's head. One of the most resourceful preparations you could imagine. Mom and my grandmother would make this together in late fall. They'd clean the head, boil it until the meat fell from the bone, pick it all by hand, and season it with sage, red pepper, black pepper, garlic, and onion. The gelatin-rich cooking liquid went over the meat in a pan and set overnight into a firm, sliceable loaf. You'd eat it cold with crackers and hot sauce, complex, porky, spicy, and quietly proud. This beautiful thing made from what most people would have thrown away. Recipe 12. Liver and onions. Liver and onions was one of those meals children dreaded and adults knew was good for them. Beef liver was inexpensive and full of iron, and in the right hands, it was genuinely delicious. Mama's hands were the right hands. She'd slice the liver thin, dredge it in flour, and fry it quick in a hot pan, just a few minutes on each side, because overcooked liver turns tough and bitter. Then the onions, cooked slow in that same pan until golden and sweet and almost melting. The gravy from the drippings and caramelized onion was dark and rich. Served over rice, it was a nourishing meal that cost very little. Recipe 13 mustard greens and fatback. Mustard greens have a sharper, more peppery flavor than collards, and that bite is exactly what makes them special. The fatback went into the pot first, rendering its fat and flavoring every leaf that cooked alongside it. A little onion, salt, black pepper, and red pepper flakes, and those greens would cook down silky and deeply flavored, with the pot liquor at the bottom tasting like a rich, smoky tea. A splash of vinegar at the table cuts through the richness perfectly. Mustard greens with fatback and cornbread is a meal that makes you glad to be alive. Recipe 14. Fried green tomatoes. When the garden had tomatoes that hadn't ripened yet, those firm, tart green ones were not going to waste. Mama would slice them, salt them, dip them in buttermilk, and dredge them in seasoned cornmeal. Into the hot skillet they'd go, coming out golden and crispy on the outside with a tangy, firm flesh inside. Fried green tomatoes have a bright, almost citrusy flavor underneath all that crispy crust that makes them completely addictive. We'd eat them standing right there at the stove. Mama would swat our hands, but she'd be smiling when she did it. Recipe 15 black-eyed peas and rice. Hoppin' John. Every New Year's Day, there were black-eyed peas, said to bring good luck. But we didn't just eat them on New Year's. Black-eyed peas with rice was a regular weeknight supper because they were cheap, filling, and cooked up beautifully. Mama would cook her peas with a smoked ham hock or sausage, onion, garlic, and seasonings until tender, and the broth turned thick and smoky. Then she'd cook white rice separately and serve the peas and broth right over the top. It was satisfying in a way that's hard to explain if you didn't grow up eating it. It was humble. It was simple. It was absolutely perfect. Recipe 16 buttermilk biscuits. Mama made biscuits every morning without measuring a single thing. She'd scoop flour into a bowl, cut in lard with her fingers until it looked like coarse crumbs. Pour in cold buttermilk and stir just until it came together. Pat it gently, cut the rounds, and into the hot oven they went. 20 minutes later, those biscuits came out tall and golden with layers you could peel apart like pages in a book. Soft as a cloud inside with that warm, tangy, buttery smell that is one of the best smells in the world. And I will not argue about that. We ate those biscuits with everything. The simplest thing done with love is never just simple. Recipe 17 crackers and cane syrup. This one isn't really a recipe, it's a memory. Cane syrup and crackers was what you ate when the cupboard was almost bare and supper was still an hour away. Mama would set out a sleeve of soda crackers and a jar of dark, thick cane syrup, and we dip and eat and be perfectly happy. Cane syrup is darker and more complex than corn syrup, with a deep caramel, slightly bitter flavor that is deeply satisfying. This was a holdover from the Depression era. Hard times echo forward into the next generation. And so this little snack carried survival in every bite, even if we were too young to know it. Recipe 18 stewed okra and tomatoes. Okra was a garden staple across the South, and stewed okra and tomatoes was one of the most common summer dishes I remember. Mama would slice fresh okra into rounds, Dice up ripe tomatoes and cook them together with onion, garlic, salt, pepper, and a little bacon grease. The okra releases a natural thickener as it cooks that turns the tomato liquid into something almost like a gravy. The tomatoes break down and get sweeter, and the whole pot becomes a thick, savory stew that is wonderful over white rice. Some people don't like okra because of that thick quality, but that's exactly the point. That's how my grandmama always did it, and she was right. Recipe 19. Pot liquor and cornbread crumbles. Pot liquor was not just a leftover. In some households, it was the main event. After the greens were gone, that dark, deeply flavored liquid at the bottom of the pot was poured into a bowl and served on its own. You'd crumble your cornbread right into it, let it soak up that smoky, savory broth, and eat it with a spoon. Pot liquor is full of vitamins and minerals from the greens. What looked like cooking water was actually one of the most nutritious things on the table. Mama always made sure nobody poured it down the drain. Recipe 20. Corn pudding. Corn pudding sat somewhere between a vegetable and a dessert, and it was welcome at any table, any time of year. Mama would cut fresh corn off the cob and scrape the back to get all that sweet milky juice, then mix it with eggs, milk, a little sugar, salt, butter, and a touch of flour, and bake it in a buttered dish until golden and custardy and barely set in the middle. Served alongside smothered chicken, the sweetness of the corn balanced the savory richness of the meat perfectly. It disappeared fast at every meal, and there was never quite enough of it. Recipe 21. Fried chicken. Gizzards. Gizzards are tough and misunderstood, but Mama knew what to do with them. She'd simmer them first in seasoned water for a full hour until they became tender, and that step is the secret. Skip the simmering and you'll be chewing all night. Once tender, she'd dry them off, season them, roll them in seasoned flour, and fry them in hot oil until deep golden brown and crispy. The inside would be chewy in a satisfying way with a rich, dark, minerally flavor all their own, cheap, filling, and when done right, absolutely delicious. Recipe 22. Dried bean and ham bone soup. After a holiday ham was eaten, the bone never went to waste. Never. Mama would take that ham bone, put it in a pot with dry beans, onions, celery, carrots, garlic, and water, and cook it all day. What you ended up with was a thick, hearty, smoky soup that tasted like it had been labored over for days. The ham bone gave the broth a richness no store-bought broth could match. The beans became creamy and soft, with little bits of ham falling throughout, so every spoonful had something in it. This soup was the definition of making something from nothing. Recipe 23. Sweet potato biscuits. Sweet potato biscuits were something special. Mama would bake a sweet potato until soft, scoop out the flesh, mash it smooth, and work it into her biscuit dough. The result was a biscuit that was slightly orange, slightly sweet, and incredibly tender, with a warmth that regular biscuits simply didn't have. They were wonderful with just butter because the natural sweetness of the potato meant they didn't need much. They were also extraordinary alongside savory dishes, offsetting spicy stews or salty pork in the most beautiful way. A little more work than regular biscuits, so they were usually a weekend treat. But that golden orange color coming out of the oven made every bit of it worth it. Recipe 24. Rice and gravy. Sometimes the simplest things are the most profound. Rice and gravy was exactly what it sounds like, and in the right hands, it was one of the most satisfying meals imaginable. The gravy could be left over from smothered chicken, neck bones, or fried pork chops, whatever you had. If you had no leftover gravy, you made a quick pan gravy with fat, flour, broth, and seasoning. That gravy, dark and glossy and deeply flavored, poured over fluffy white rice, cost almost nothing, and gave back everything. Just good ingredients, well seasoned. served with love. Recipe 25 molasses cookies. For something sweet, molasses cookies required very little and delivered a great deal. Mama would cream lard and sugar, beat in an egg, and pour in dark molasses, which gave the dough its color and deep bittersweet flavor. A little flour, baking soda, ginger, cinnamon, and cloves, and the dough came together dark and fragrant. Rolled into balls and flattened on a baking sheet, those cookies spread into thin, chewy rounds with crackly tops. The smell of them baking was so warm and spiced and sweet that it made the whole house feel like a holiday. One or two was enough to make you feel like you'd been given something special. Recipe 26. Boiled peanuts. Boiled peanuts were more of a tradition than a recipe. Raw peanuts, still in the shell, went into a big pot of heavily salted water and cooked for hours. You could not rush a boiled peanut. When they were done, the shells were soft and the peanuts inside were tender, salty, and almost creamy, completely unlike a roasted peanut. We'd eat them on the porch in the evening, cracking them open one by one, letting the shells fall into a paper bag. It was slow food in every sense, food that forced you to be still, to take your time, to sit and talk, and just be with each other. They cost almost nothing, but the evenings they gave us were priceless. Recipe 27. Fried apples. Fried apples were breakfast and dessert, and a side dish all at once, depending on who you asked. Mama would peel and slice her apples and cook them in a skillet with butter, sugar, cinnamon, and a pinch of nutmeg until they softened and the sugar caramelized into a thick, sticky syrup. Served over biscuits for breakfast, they were extraordinary. Alongside pork chops for supper, they balanced the saltiness beautifully. The smell of apples frying in cinnamon butter is one of those smells that stays with you. It is comfort. It is autumn. It is home. Recipe 28. Chitterlings. Chitterlings, or chitlins as we always called them, were a once or twice a year dish, usually around the holidays. Cleaning them was a labor of love that took most of a day, and Mama never cut corners on it. She cleaned them by hand, inside and out, again and again until they were spotless. That's the most important step. Then they'd go into a big pot with onion, garlic, apple cider vinegar, red pepper, and bay leaves and cook for hours until tender. When properly cleaned and properly cooked, chitlins are mild and rich and deeply savory. In our house, they were eaten with ceremony. The whole family gathered because they were a special occasion, a reminder of the people who made something good from what they were given. Recipe 29. The payoff. Sunday, neck bones, and butter beans. And now we've come to it, the one I told you about at the very beginning. My mother's Sunday neck bones and butter beans. I don't know if I can get through this one without tearing up. So just bear with me. Every Sunday morning, before we even left for church, Mama had already put her neck bones on the stove. She'd seasoned them with salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and onion powder, and browned them in her big pot until they were dark and crusty on every side. Then she'd cover them with water, add a whole onion cut in half, a few cloves of garlic, and a bay leaf, and let them start their long, slow cook. When we came home from church, the house smelled like heaven, not like clouds and wings, like home, like love, like something so deep and good and real that it made your chest tight just to walk through that door. Then she'd add the butter beans, fresh or dried, depending on the season. Butter beans are large lima beans, and they have this creamy, mild, slightly sweet flavor that is the perfect companion for those neck bones. She'd let everything cook together for another couple of hours until the beans were completely tender and had absorbed all that smoky, meaty broth. The neck bones by this point were so tender that the meat slid right off when you touched it with a spoon. The broth had turned thick and dark and rich, somewhere between a soup and a gravy, and those butter beans floated in it like little pillows of comfort. She'd taste it, adjust the salt, add a little black pepper, and then she'd call us to the table. We'd eat it in bowls with white rice on the side and cornbread to soak up every drop. Nobody talked much at first. We just ate. And somewhere in the middle of that bowl, you'd feel this settling, this deep, warm, full feeling that was about more than just food. It was safety. It was belonging. It was love made into something you could hold in a bowl and eat with a spoon. I have made that recipe hundreds of times since my mother passed, and every single time I cry a little, not from sadness, from gratitude, from the privilege of having had a mother who cooked like that, who loved like that, who always, always found a way. Recipe 30, cornmeal mush. Our last dish brings us back to the very simplest things. Cornmeal stirred into boiling salted water, cooked low and slow into a smooth, warm porridge. You could eat it soft right out of the pot, with butter and a drizzle of molasses for breakfast. Or pour it into a pan, let it firm overnight, slice it and fry it in butter until crispy outside and creamy inside. Fried cornmeal mush with cane syrup was one of my earliest food memories. That crispy outside, that creamy inside, that dark sweet syrup pooling on the plate. It asked for nothing and gave everything. You don't have to have much to nourish the people you love. You just have to know what to do with what you have. My goodness, we covered a lot of ground today. Let me walk you back through all 30, just so you can hold them close. Pinto bean soup, fried salt pork and gravy, cast iron cornbread, collard greens with ham hocks, crackling bread, dried pea porridge, smothered chicken, neck bones and rice, chicken feet stew, fried catfish, hog head cheese, liver and onions, mustard greens and fatback, fried green tomatoes, hoppin' john, buttermilk biscuits, crackers and cane syrup, stewed okra and tomatoes, pot liquor and cornbread crumbles, corn pudding, fried chicken gizzards, dried bean and ham bone soup, sweet potato biscuits, rice and gravy, molasses cookies, boiled peanuts, fried apples, chitterlings, Sunday neck bones and butter beans, and cornmeal mush. 30 dishes, 30 acts of love. Now I want you to hear me before I let you go. These meals were born out of hard times, out of Jim Crow and sharecropping and making do with what was given. The women who made them were operating under conditions that were not fair and not kind. And yet, out of those conditions, they created something extraordinary, a cuisine, a tradition, memories that their grandchildren are still carrying today. These recipes were never about poverty. They were about ingenuity, about dignity, about the absolute refusal to let hard circumstances stop you from feeding your family something good. So the next time you cook a pot of beans, or fry a piece of cornbread, or stir up something simple and warm, think about the hands that came before yours. The women who stood at wood stoves and cast iron skillets and made miracles out of Monday. They deserve to be remembered. Thank you for sitting at my table today. If you remember a dish your family made that isn't on this list, please share it in the comments. Keep these memories alive, because that is how we honor the people who fed us. Next time, I'm taking you back to the church supper table. The covered dish meals, the big pots that whole congregations built together on Sunday afternoons. You come back now, you hear. God bless you, everyone.